I'm back with another I kind of didn't realize time literally just drained all, and everything has really literally just drained all this video. So I personally think that are dying and rituals that are either being limited or not being allowed at all. But of people's lives are being because of this. So one of the huge reasons I chose to talk about in this video is because I think more often than not, video to where from and why these rituals are so important and whatnot. Now, I had said that the death rituals into the 3rd and 4th century, the death rituals were the most important. The belief that if you did not pay the ferryman for his pay his fare, was important to the ancients. So one of the things that they had coins over the eyes of the deceased, and that still practicing polytheism, they would actually present the coins to so one of the other things that was done is known as cremation. Now, cremation is really being used a lot nowadays because of the number of people that have died because of the coronavirus. Another reason that cremation is being used is because the virus is still alive. So you have a deceased that's died from it, but the virus is still inside the body. It's still so the virus is in one of two ways, either in the process of dying itself, but there's still enough of the virus to cause problems. So that's why cremation is being done, because it makes the deceased safe to be handled. So I'm going to actually Google this because I kind of want to give you guys a really good general view of it. And if you guys want to comment, looks like my whatchamacallit is working. My live chat's working. So yes. So if anybody wants to wants to ask me a question, that would be great. So let's look this. Okay. So, oh wow. So yeah. So it's like they have death rituals in Rome, death rituals in Greece. Okay, so it says here the Mycenaeans practiced a ritual burial of the dead and did so consistently. The body of the deceased was prepared to lie in state, followed by a procession to the resting place and a single grave or a family tomb. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so it says here, the ancient Greek conception of the afterlife and the ceremonies associated with burial was already well established by the 6th century BC. In the Odyssey, Homer burial was already well established by the 6th century BC. In the Odyssey, Homer describes the underworld deep beneath the earth, where Hades, the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, and his wife Persephone, reigned over countless drifting crowds of shadowy figures, the shades of all who had died. It was not a happy place. Indeed, the ghost of the great hero Achilles told Odysseus he would rather be a poor serf on earth than a lord of all the dead of the underworld. The Greeks believed that at the moment of death, the psyche or spirit of the dead left the body to as little breath of a puff of wind. The deceased was then prepared for ritual according to the time-honored rituals. Ancient literary sources emphasize the necessary proper burial and refer to the omission of burial rites as an insult to human dignity. Relatives of the deceased, primarily women, conducted the elaborate burial rites that were customary in 3 parts: the laying of body, the funeral procession, and the interment of the body or cremation. Yeah. So it says here during the laying out of the body, the funeral procession, and the interment. Okay, it says here, all right. Um, Sorry about that. Okay, so during the laying of the body, relatives and friends came to mourn and pay their respects. Laminations of the dead is featured. Where am I at here? Okay. All right. So it says here, lamination of the dead. Okay, there I found feature. It's featured in Greek art as least as early as the geometric period, when vases were decorated with scenes portraying the deceased surrounded by mourners. Following the laying out of the body, the deceased was brought to the cemetery in a procession. The uh, the the funeral procession, which usually took place just before dawn. Very few objects were actually placed in the grave, but monumental earth mounds, rectangular built tombs, and elaborate marble stelae and statues were often erected to mark the grave and to ensure the deceased would not be forgotten. Immortality laid in the continued remembrance of the dead by the living. From depictions on the white ground, which we know was worn, which we know that women in classical Athens made regular visits to the graves with offerings that included small cakes and libations. The most lavishly funeral monuments were erected in the 6th century BC by aristocratic families of Attica in private burial grounds along the roadside of the family estate or near Athens. Relief sculpture statues, tall stelae crowned by capitals, and I cannot pronounce it, marked many of these graves. Each funerary monument had an inscribed base with an epithet, often in a verse that memorized the dead. A relief depicting a generalized image of the deceased sometimes invoked aspects of the person's life with the addition of a servant, possessions, dog, etc. On early reliefs, it is easy to identify the dead person. However, during the 4th century BC, more and more family members were added to the scene. Often many names were inscribed, making it difficult to distinguish the deceased from the mourners. Like all marble sculptures, funerary statues, and grave steles were brightly painted, and extensive remains of red, black, blue, green pigment can still be seen. All right. Many of the finest Attica grave monuments stood in a cemetery located in the outer, basically it was like outside the city. The cemetery was in use for centuries. And it says here, excavations have uncovered a clear layout of tombs from the classical period as well. The end of the 5th century BC, Athenian families began to bury their dead in simple stone sarcophagi placed in the ground within the grave precinct, arranged in a man-made terrace, buttresses by a high retaining wall that faced Cemetery Road. Marble monuments belonging to various members of the family were placed along the edge of the terrace rather than out of the graves themselves. And it's from the Department of Greek and Roman Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, from 2003. Okay, so there. So you get a really good in the grave hole, which means that they were not burned. Probably the most disturbing part of the whole thing came way, way, way after death. And it was interesting is you had these crew members with the city over there in Greece that was busy doing some kind of work, and they found a grave stele. And what was sickening about it was used as a manhole cover. So it really tells you a lot about the people that put it there. I mean, why would you take a grave stele or a grave marker and use it as a manhole cover? And I think that the answer is so people can walk on it. Now, this is, a lot of people are going to look at this and say, this is clear evidence that the church had no respect for the people that had died thousands of years before the birth of Christ. And their assumption is absolutely correct. To the church, the people that had died a long, long, long time ago, their grave steles were not immune of cemetery of gravestones or tombstones, which are the descendants of grave stele. We see them knocked over. We have this view that death is to be respected, that death is supposed to be People, their tombstones are supposed to be left alone. But the knocking over of someone's tombstone based on their religion, based on who they were, is a very, very ancient practice. And it is actually, when you go and you church did over 1500 years ago. So it is, it's pretty bad. Find out. Let's see if. Okay, so let's. Um, let's see. All right. Um, let's just see if I can find it. I doubt they're going to have it. Let's see here. All right. Hold on. Trying to find it. No, I can't find it. Apparently, I don't have it. You can well over 1,000 years, and they basically ripped it off. Probably destroyed the statues that had been around his grave or her grave, and basically pulled it and turned it into a reusable. A reusable marble for their street. Um, and I think there was. I think that the thing. I'm not able to talk right today, but I think the huge reason that this was done is they saw these grave steles of dead pagans as reusable material. So they had no problem with basically destroying the grave precinct for the marble and basically leaving the area bare. They probably destroyed any kind of evidence that it had been a grave precinct. And they took this material and they reused it because, hey, we're the conquerors. We can do whatever we fuck we want. Um, and that was the attitude that a lot of Christians had was, this is revenge for what happened to our ancestors over 200 years ago. So we're going to go and we're going to rip the graves. We're going to rip the grave stele from pagans that died long before we were even born, and we're going to disrespect them. And the thing about it was that probably animals trod on it, probably animals urinated on it, people stepped on it, and pretty sure, and hundreds of years later, people were probably stepping on it, and they really did not realize what they were stepping on. I'm not going to say that people 500 years after those grave steles were ripped off. People 500 years after those grave steles were ripped off their foundations, even knew they were trying on somebody's grave marker, which, I don't know what they would have thought if they, I know did in the past. But these death rituals were highly important to the ancient Greeks. This was a way of giving respect. This was a way of memorializing the dead, and this was something that they felt in their heart of hearts had to be done, because there was a law back and they could hurt you. Ancient Greek life, and when these steles are finally uncovered, years, but their inscriptions of people that had been dead for over 1,000 years. Thankfully, thankfully, um, if you look at cities that were covered up, their, as far as I know, their grave precincts are pretty much intact because their cities were destroyed well before Christianity took over as a dominant religion. And so if they uncover a grave precinct, chances are all the steles are there. All the steles are either in pieces, depending on how the city was destroyed, or they're in one piece. And you pretty much know what grave goes with what stele, and you know who it was that died there and all that. So yeah, so like I said, it's a really interesting subject. All right, so sorry about this being a very short one. I got to go and get something to drink, and I don't want to, like leave you guys hanging or whatever. But yeah, I mean, let's see if I want to see if I can put anything. Yeah, that should be about it. I'm sorry about this being not an hour-long video like last week's one was, but I just wanted to talk about that and everything. So if you guys know any famous steles or whatever of some deceased people, please let me know. So I will see you guys around. Until next time, be blessed. And Thursday, I do another one, I think is for Medea and Circe. I have to check. But yeah, so looking forward to talking about that. Hopefully it will be longer than 20 minutes or 21 minutes. So until next time, be blessed.